Let's make a deal. Welcome. It's Money Talk, the Annex Wealth Management Show. Busy show today. We are glad you're here. I'm Danny Clayton in the studio. Dr. Brian Jacobsen, our chief economist. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, Brian's going to pop my balloon again because I was really excited on Thursday because we had that UK deal come down and you said, yeah, well, it's not that big of a deal. The big deal is this weekend with China.
That's right. So this was like a little deal, maybe a mini deal that we had with the United Kingdom. And that was, I thought that really what it did was it clarified a few things, right? So we have a trade surplus with the United Kingdom. Unlike China, we have a massive trade deficit. So very different. And I'm not sure we can read a lot from the UK deal as to what we might get from China. So Treasury Secretary Bessent is going to be meeting with a few officials in Switzerland. And there's some expectation that maybe come Monday, we could get an announcement of turning down the temperature, lowering the volume a little bit about the battle between the U.S. and China.
Even if it wasn't really a big deal, it still kind of tweaked the market a little bit.
It did, although when I was watching how the market was acting while President Trump was talking, there was the announcement of the deal between the U.S. and the U.K., and it was kind of weak beer, in my opinion. And it was mainly because we know that there's like this minimum 10% for the tariffs. So that was kind of news saying that, well, I'm not going to go any lower than that. And there was some tweaks around the edges in terms of let's let 100,000 automobiles into the United States at that 10% tariff level. Anything above that, 27.5%. Some deal with ethanol and beef. But in terms of the market reaction, it seemed like the market really started turning positive when President Trump really changed his tone towards China. So it wasn't about the UK trade deal. It's when reporters started asking him about what does this mean for China relationships. And he started saying some very positive things. So that's something that we know that the Chinese officials have been talking about up to this point is saying that, look, we want you to show us some respect, right? Maybe if you can change the rhetoric a little bit, that's going to set a better tone for these talks. And I think President Trump did a really good job of really talking up, saying that, yeah, we're going to sit down at the table. We have our issues, but we're going to work this out like adults.
Is this a high drama case of uncle? Right? Because if you look at China's exports, they've fallen off a cliff. Now, they say that they're going to other nations.
Yeah.
However, we're pretty important to them.
We are. Although over time, ever since the first Trump administration, China has been exporting more to other countries. But then you get into this issue of what's called transshipping, where China might export to Vietnam or India or Mexico, and then those goods are transformed a little bit. Maybe they slap a label on there, and then it comes into the United States. So we might not have as much direct trade. It's more this indirect trade. The data that we got this past week from the United States and China was really interesting. So for the U.S., we got the March trade data. So a lot of this was like pre-tariffs, right? Because remember, Liberation Day was April 2nd. So we did see a big increase, the surge in imports into the United States as people tried to front run the tariffs. Now we got the April data from China. They're a little bit faster in getting their data releases. So that was like this post-tariff environment. And it showed a massive drop in exports directly to the United States. But on net, there was an increase in exports as shipments went to other countries. Now, this has created a really interesting situation for other countries where they're a little concerned about, well, if China isn't going to be selling their products into the U.S., are they going to be dumping them, selling them below cost into other countries to absorb all that capacity that they have?
We're going to talk a little bit more about the Fed later in the show, but let's talk about oil because oil is in the news again.
It is, and I think that all this talk about tariffs has really obscured this really big story, which is look at what has happened to oil prices. They're down more than 20% year to date. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is really led by Saudi Arabia, I think they've been working with President Trump to say, hey, let's get oil prices lower. Saudi Arabia also has been doing the heavy lifting in trying to keep oil prices up. And so you have this problem, this free rider problem, where other countries like Kazakhstan, Brazil, other members of OPEC are kind of free riding on them lowering their output to keep prices higher. And Saudi Arabia says, okay, enough is enough. You guys start complying with these output quotas. Otherwise, we're going to drive that price lower. Now, the problem is we're not really seeing a lot of relief at the pump. So the nationwide average price of gasoline is only down to $3.15. That is off of $3.60, which is where it was when President Trump was inaugurated. But the drop in oil prices hasn't translated, penny for penny into a drop at the pump.